Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and this is a special broadcast. I will call this, for lack of a better term, Election Special. And with me this evening is Dr. Glenn Thoren, who I believe can be considered the resident Chelmsford Telemedia political commenter, okay? So we have just decided that that's what you are, so...
I may know nothing, but I can comment about everything.
You know a lot. Those folks who watch the local TV broadcast during any election time know Glenn very well, because usually you're on with Kelly Beatty, and you guys do the post-election wrap-up. And so you're well known to the audience from that perspective. So I think when we're going to have any kind of a discussion about elections, I think you're the right person to talk to. So welcome. Glad you're here.
Hey, we should have some fun.
I hope so. I hope so. Why don't you give the audience just a tiny snapshot of your Chelmsford history and what you've done in town, and then we'll go from there.
I'll try keeping it super brief. We moved to Chelmsford in 1980, and in 1989, when they started the representative town meeting process, my wife and I decided to go into that pool of potential representatives and put our name on the ballot. One of the things that concerned me was that anybody from town could run for town meeting rep, which means if you were employed by the town, you could run for town meeting rep, and maybe you'd decide on your own pay raise, something like that. So that never happened, but it was a concern at the time. So we both ran and were elected in 1989, so which means we've been in the town meeting for 35 years now, which is it's a long time. And we've participated, you and I both have participated on charter review committees and various other committees around the town, too long to mention.
Yes.
But Chelmsford is a great town because people get involved, they stay involved. We're a couple of examples of that, and they really care about what goes on in the town. Most importantly, we may disagree on maybe state and national issues, but on town issues, there's a great rapport between everybody at town meeting and how we make our decisions. So it's quite an active group, and I think a very discerning group on which way we go in the town.
Well, I think that's very well said. And certainly, you've contributed greatly to the success of town meeting. You speak only when you have to speak, and I wish more people would follow that line of thinking. So anyway, we're here to talk about the upcoming election, which on the actual voting day is November 5th, and of course everybody knows that early voting is an option. Mail-in is an option. Early voting started last Saturday on the 19th, and it will run until November 1st.
Yes.
Okay? So if you want to early vote, you do it just the way you would vote on election day. You show up at your precinct place and you go in and they check you off the list and you fill out the ballot and you put your ballot into the machine and you're good to go. So that's a good thing to do. And it certainly makes it a lot easier for people who may not be able to get to the polls on election day. I like it because you never know what's going to happen, especially at my age, right? I mean, you may wait till the last day and then you get sick or
pandemic
something comes
may break out. You never know what happens.
So
the other good thing is you can get a mail-in ballot,
yes,
which my wife and I signed up for to get all mail-in ballots, and you can take that ballot, fill it out, you can mail it back, you can walk it into town hall. I mean, so you've got a more variety of options if you get a mail-in ballot as well.
That's right. So why limit your options? I think it works out very well. So I think primarily what we want to do tonight is talk about the ballot questions, because a lot of people, they either miss them or they don't understand them. And then if we have some time left at the end of the show, we can talk a little bit about the races, although there aren't too many races on the ballot. So why don't we start with the Secretary of State's information for voters booklet. I will hold it up. I don't know. Yeah, you can see that. That's fine. That's what it looks like. So if you're a registered voter in town, you should have received, quite some time ago actually, this booklet in the mail. So it is exactly what it says. It's information for voters. It only talks about the state federal election, and well, actually, that's not true. It does. We do have local candidates, but if your town, as we do in Chelmsford, has a ballot question, it's not going to show up in this book. So we have 5 ballot questions that are statewide, and then we have question number 6, which is Chelmsford local, and that relates to a bond exemption, and we'll talk about that. So why don't we get started on the question?
First, I want to open with something.
Go ahead.
Everybody may have seen this book. Many people may have tossed it away, but I got to say something. I have read some of the most complex books on quantum physics you could possibly ever imagine, and this particular booklet, and I took law courses in college, and this particular booklet is enough to warp your mind. I bet if you grabbed 10,000 people randomly in the state of Massachusetts, you would be lucky to find 2 that read this book and its contents. Now, they might get the very first section of the yes and no, pros and cons on the question, and then move on. But there's a lot of information that follows that, but
Yes.
nobody's going to read it. It must be a legal requirement. You read it.
Yes.
Well, why am I not surprised? But
yeah.
this is a heavy-duty book, which is nice that we're talking
Yeah.
about it, because
You're
there's
right.
some really interesting questions in the book.
Well, being the skeptic that I am, I read the whole thing simply because at the beginning you have the executive summary, and I just want to make sure that the executive summary is actually reflects what the actual text says.
Not a bad habit.
I've been reading these books for years, and I have to say, they've never done a bait and switch on the executive summary. So
A couple Tylenol and a good pair of glasses, and you're all set.
if you don't want to read the entire text, you can feel relatively safe if you read the summary. You will get the gist of the question. But I still would recommend that you try to get through the text because there is a lot of detail. So thank you for mentioning that. So the first question is a question as to whether or not the state auditor has the authority to conduct an audit of the state legislature. And generally speaking, the way these questions are posed, a yes vote generally votes for the proposal. In other words, a yes vote will make a change. If you just don't want anything to change, you can just go in and vote no on everything, and nothing will change. Everything will stay just the way it is.
Exactly right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this first question, Glenn.
So this one was one of the most amusing questions on the list of state questions, because here, you got to think about it from a personal perspective. We have primarily a Democrat-run state, and we have a legislature that has done things in the past in the midnight hour. And here the state auditor wants to come in and be able to audit where the money is being spent, by whom, for what, from the state legislature. So it's basically a transparency and accountability question, at least the way I read it, and you can tell me if you see a different question there. And the state legislature says, no, we believe that it's a separation of powers, that we get to do essentially whatever we decide to do, and we get to audit ourselves. Well, they get an outside auditor to come in, but you know how that works. And so having a state elected auditor look at the way the legislature is spending the money, are they getting the value for the dollars, are they getting their goals done? I thought that made perfect common sense. And so I just was amused by the fact that the legislature, in refuting it, doesn't want anybody looking at them that closely.
Shocking, isn't it?
I don't know what to say.
Yes. How many people raise their hand and say, well, I volunteer to be audited? No, you don't have that. It's really funny, and of course, I think you hit the nail right on the head. The funny thing is you read the opposition in here, and what you come away with is the state legislature does not want to be audited because they wrote the opposition piece in here. So I think I agree with you. I think it's pretty simple. And I give credit. You talked about a one-party state. I think we'd be in the same boat if it were the other way. I think if we were lopsided Republican, we'd have the same kinds of problems. A one party, in my opinion, is not a good thing. I think the state is healthier if we have a dominant party, but I think the opposition party has to be strong enough so that it has some ability to act as a check on the
But for the
majority.
state auditor to do this, I thought was extremely insightful.
Thank you. That's the point I was going to make. She's a Democrat.
That's right.
The state legislature is overwhelmingly Democrat, and so for a Democrat auditor to say these birds need to be audited, I give her credit. I really do. Hats off, you know.
The only thing I can say is, what are you hiding?
Yeah.
You know, what exactly are you hiding? So, you know,
Yeah.
my personal opinion is on question 1, the vote is yes. Which,
Okay.
since my ballot's already in, that's what I did.
Well, yes, you've already voted. That's
Yes,
good.
that's right.
So you recommend a yes vote on
I would, because,
Yep.
you know, transparency generally doesn't cut poorly for the general public. They do say that if you dig deep enough into the records and archives of the state legislature, you can find out all the information you're looking for. You know, try that out on a weekend afternoon or something like
Yeah.
that. But an auditor will take a look and put a light on things that are obviously of interest to the general public.
Right. No, I'm very suspicious of those folks in the legislature that say you should not audit us. I mean, that's classic red flag language.
Oh, you bet.
All right. Well, that's good. Okay, so now let's move on to number 2. And I find this question to be very, very controversial and very emotional in having discussions, especially if you talk to people who are in public education. So what we're talking about here on question 2 is a law proposed by initiative petition to eliminate the MCAS testing as a high school graduation requirement. So in Massachusetts, you do not graduate from a public high school unless you pass the MCAS test, and I believe that's given in the 10th grade.
10th grade, right.
And if you have trouble taking the test at that point, you have 2 years to recoup, and they give you several chances and so forth. So it's
It's a 10th grade level test.
Yeah, correct.
Which 12th grade level students should
be able to pass. Yeah. No, I think the way they structured it, I agree with that logic. So they made it so that if you are appropriately, if you have the appropriate knowledge and you've done your work as a student, by the 12th grade, you shouldn't have that much trouble passing the tests. But anyway, this is a very emotional question. There are people on both sides of the issue who speak passionately about it. What say you?
Funny you should ask. So, my wife was a high school chemistry teacher. She was on the school committee for 18 years, and this subject goes back and forth all the time. I believe there's a lot of inherent value in having some standard by which you can measure comparatively, you know, all the towns in the state, all the students in the state that are graduating from high school. And they do have some figures in the arguments here that show how very, very few students don't pass the MCAS test. And for those that don't pass, there are alternative things they can do to get the equivalent of passing the MCAS test. But for the vast majority of students, they pass. And so changing this to make this not a requirement for the vast majority of students has a couple of different effects. It allows individual towns to determine at what level they measure the education of the students and decide that that's good enough, you pass.
Assuming they'll measure it at all.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
But, you know, there are some everybody's heard these stories about they pass students to the next grade without actually fulfilling the requirements of the grade they're in, because that's the easiest thing to do. And one thing that caught me here is they say the MCAS creates a classroom full of anxiety and stress. You know, and my personal opinion is that in the real world, there's some anxiety and stress. You go out to try and get a job and do a job, there'll be anxiety and stress. But they don't want the students to have to put up with that level of anxiety while they're studying. They want them to be able to have a comforting and nurturing environment and let the teachers decide whether they've learned enough to get to the level of graduating from their high school. Now, what does this generate? This could possibly generate a great deal of inequity across the state, because some towns, I won't name names, may be more willing to pass their students on and graduate them than other towns. Chelmsford, for example, will maintain high standards. I know they will. You know, I know the teachers, I know the superintendent. They want the students to learn a lot, perform well, and so forth. You know, the MCAS won't take away their ability to do that, but it does, you know, when you don't have an MCAS common standard, it allows you to graduate students at any level that particular town or group of teachers feels is adequate. That creates inequity among the students, when I think you should have a standardized test to make sure the entire state is dealing with the student population in a similar fashion. In other words, they also claim here that you take away that standards, and our potential amount of education for graduation would be below that of Mississippi and Alabama, or Arkansas, Mississippi and Arkansas. So having a standardized test, I believe, has an extraordinary amount of value, and those students, those very, very few students that don't pass the MCAS test, even with the 2 years to retake it and so forth, they can be handled separately. There are appeals processes, but it's a small, like 1% of the students or less have that particular problem. So
Yes.
you're creating an opportunity for an equity in school systems throughout the state by removing a common standard.
And everything that Glenn just said is encapsulated here in this. That this
It is.
the
This wasn't
entire-
this wasn't a bad read.
No, you've actually summarized very accurately what this says. So, what is your assessment on that one?
I would vote no on this because I wouldn't want to eliminate the MCAS. In spite of the fact that it does create stress and anxiety, learning is a stressful environment to begin with.
Yes.
So, we're not teaching students to be comfortable at learning, whatever they feel like learning and feel good about doing
Yep.
it. It's important to inject sufficient amount of challenge, and I don't call it stress, I call it challenge, into the student curriculum so that they meet a minimum standard of 10th grade level by the time they finish 12th grade.
And I think that's very important. I'll give you a little bit of a counter argument that I've heard from professional teachers and some whom I actually respect quite a lot and know their particular expertise. So what I've heard from some teachers is they're not opposed to the concept of a test and a standard or measurement. What they say is that the way the current situation is structured, a classroom teacher, especially at the elementary level, they spend a lot more time showing the kids how to take the test than they do in actually imparting the knowledge that they need to pass the test. So what I'm hearing is that there's a significant logistics problem in getting it's not apparently, I don't know because I've never taken an MCAS test, but apparently it's not okay, here's a question, what's the answer? I mean, it's kind of the way they teach math now. You have to go through all these mental gyrations in order to get to.
Which may not be the best way to teach it.
But that's what I'm told by some of the folks. So
I assume you took SATs, I took SATs,
yes,
because
yes.
there has to be some
Yes.
standard of measurement.
Well, actually, the school system that I grew up in, and again, there was no standardized test as a graduation requirement, but the town, we took the New York State Regents test.
Oh, Regents, yes.
That's what our town used, okay? And that started in the 8th grade. So I can remember in the 8th grade taking a Regents exam, and those things were tough, and they had them in the various subject matters. And then you took it again in high school. And it didn't keep you, if you didn't pass, it didn't keep you from graduating.
It really,
Okay, but it was something that was very, very heavily stressed as an academic requirement, and it certainly affected your grades, okay?
did the Regents test affect your
Oh,
grades?
yeah. We took it in the senior year, and the Regents exam was a quarter of your grade in the subject area. That's what they did. Now, in today, I don't think that would fly today.
No,
that would be considered way too tough.
You're a couple years ahead of me, but
Yeah.
in Arlington we had testing all through, like every other year in the grade levels, but that didn't affect your grade. You had teachers that would teach you and grade you according to what they taught you.
Certainly. But
I found the tests were useful in determining, gee, I'm not that strong in English or whatever the subject
Right.
was. I need to work harder on that. So they revealed some weaknesses in the education process that I, as an individual student, and other students would have to take care of. So
Well, okay, so that one, you say that's a...
I'd
No,
keep the
do not-
MCAS standard.
do
I'd
not
vote no.
Keep the standard. Okay, so now, question number 3, we're talking about unionization for transportation network drivers, and this primarily, if you read through the text here, primarily is intended to address the driver situation for Uber and Lyft. Okay, it will not cover those employees who are subcontractors who
Deal
work,
Dash.
they work for FedEx and the DoorDash,
DoorDash,
and
right. Deal
Amazon.
Dash is something
Those
else.
folks are not included here. So this is primarily for Uber and Lyft drivers. So
So the interesting part about this particular question is it really is creating a new type of bureaucracy for the state and for the companies, and creating a union. I think it's 2.5% of those people that are determined to be active drivers, which means they drive 100 hours a month or something like that, can petition to form a union, and then the wheel starts turning. And when they form a union, the union has to have union members that part of your dues go to pay them, and then there's an entire statewide bureaucracy that pops up behind the monitoring of the union activity.
It's quite astounding, and it's all fully described. We have,
Unfortunately.
it's 6 pages. And
I recommend not reading this.
Yeah, this is one you might want to skip, reading the entire text, because, and as somebody who dealt with unions in my professional career, I mean, I read through this, and I was even surprised at some of the mechanisms that they put in place here. But anyway, continue.
But on page 14, they kind of summarize it very succinctly that the drivers in Massachusetts, Uber and Lyft drivers, already have a base salary of $32.50 an hour, paid sick leave, paid medical family leave, health care stipend, on-the-job injury insurance, anti-discrimination protections, domestic violence leave, anti-retaliation protections, and an appeals process. So there's, just for the fact that they're an independent contractor in Massachusetts, they have these capabilities that accrue to them. And the union is a completely different thing, because then it becomes a collective bargaining unit to add or subtract some of the things that you see I just mentioned here. And it may end up being more expensive to take an Uber or a Lyft or something like that. If the union wants to jack it up and they're members of the union, your ride rates are going to go up.
Yep. So I think that's, so what is your conclusion?
I voted no on this, because I believe people that want to get extra money and are happy with doing this kind of service with those things that I just mentioned should be allowed to do that without having part of their pay or whatever's accrued to them taken by a union into collective bargaining, for which they have really no strong say in the outcome. And again, the bureaucracy that rolls up underneath this, including the union bureaucracy, is all going to raise cost.
Okay, that's okay. So now let's move on to number 4. Limited legalization and regulation of certain natural psychedelic substances.
I know this was your favorite one, sir.
i.e. drugs, okay?
I know this was your favorite one.
Yep, so what happens if we vote for this?
So this particular one, allows certain businesses to open up in towns, and even though they're somewhat regulated businesses, the way I read it, the town could not refuse having one of these businesses open in town.
Correct.
Where they could administer, I guess I'd call it, mushrooms and other psychedelic drugs, mescaline, to patrons, as long as they're over 21. But the other part of this was you could, in I think a 12-foot by 12-foot plot in your own property, grow mushrooms and the other psychedelic drugs that they refer to here, and maintain a certain amount of them for yourself and give them to other people over 21. Now, I'm not a big fan of drugs, and I didn't think Chelmsford should have cannabis, dispensaries in Chelmsford, and I'll still maintain that position. But the amount of driving under the drug influence rate that's in this state has gone up by like 50% in the recent years. So there've been a lot more traffic stops that are related to people out of control on drugs. So this would basically add to that problem. Now, if there's a medical reason why people can, need for anxiety or PTSD, get treatment for these drugs, there are drugs that can be medically administered by doctors and hospitals.
In other words, you have to get a prescription. You have to be seen by a doctor. So
in the appropriate
without that, you're allowed to make that determination yourself and self-medicate. So
this would allow that.
I did not go to medical school. I will not be doing that, okay?
But the fact that you can grow as much as you want within that 12 by 12 plot, but you can only maintain certain weights of these various drugs, but you can give it away to your friends as long as they're over 21, not charging for it, it's going to increase the amount of psychedelic drugs that are out there. And you read in the news fairly frequently accidents that happen because somebody's under the influence of a psychedelic drug, and it's generally not pretty. So, I think that this needs to be looked at a little bit more carefully. It just opens a door so wide for the growth and distribution of psychedelic drugs without a heck of a lot of control other than the amount you can keep, I didn't think it was worth passing.
Okay, so we got a no on 4. Now, let's move
I'm really a downer on something.
No, that's okay. Well, the good thing about voting no is it can't get worse because
Right.
it's status quo. Nothing changes, okay? So,
I have on one occasion, not recently, probably 5, 6 years ago, been behind a car in weather like we have today.
Yes.
With the windows open that was just as smoke was pouring out.
Yep.
And I was afraid I was going to get intoxicated driving too close.
quite possibly.
But the car was weaving back and forth across the road, and it was subject to probably being stopped if anybody other than me noticed it.
All right, last question on the state ballot. Minimum wage for tipped workers. Okay, so this question relates to whether or not servers, primarily in the food industry business, wait staff and so forth, should not be tipped as a matter of custom, but should have some amount added to their base wage to compensate them for the tips that they won't be getting. Okay, so go ahead.
And another feature is that they still allow them to be tipped, but
Oh, sure.
after the amount of tips increases above a certain wage level, the tips go into a pool, so that not just the people that are serving you, but everybody in the restaurant gets a share of those tips.
Right.
I know some very good servers in restaurants that do a terrific job, and I give them a good tip because they've earned it. You know, they take good care of me at the table and so forth. This changes all that and sort of caps the ability of a good worker to make extra money.
And what I find very interesting now, again, I'm not a server. In fact, I've done a lot of jobs in my life, but I have never, ever been wait staff. So I really can't speak
I've
on
never
that.
been tipped.
So what do I do? So I actually go and I talk to people who do this job, and I ask them. I have yet to find a waiter or waitress in a restaurant that thinks this is a good idea. So I guess in my opinion, I say, well, look, if the folks this is going to affect don't want it, why should it be imposed upon them?
I found the same.
Okay.
I asked 2 people that I know that did this in
Yep.
their younger lives, and they said, well, no, I made great tips.
There you go.
Why would I want to give somebody else my tips?
So that's a no. We have, actually, we're almost out of time. We got about 3 minutes here. So
Oh, my goodness.
We'll wrap up the last question on the ballot, which is a local option question for Chelmsford only. And I won't read the text. I'll just tell you what it is. Basically, what it says is, do you, Mr. Voter or Mrs. Voter or Miss Voter, want to pass a debt exclusion to the amount of $25 million so that we can revamp a fire station at Roberts Field and actually construct a new one where the existing one is on 295 Acton Road. So that's the question of the voters. If the voters pass that, then they authorize the $25 million to be added to the tax levy. Go.
Well, it is additional taxes, and we don't know exactly how much yet because the town's still working on that precise number, how it would affect per
It would be about, on the average, a single family, this is the benefit of being an
assessor.
On the average single family tax bill, it would be about $170.
Per year.
Per year, correct.
Well, our town fire service is excellent. I might have put the central fire station someplace else, but you know, the fire station by Roberts Field is incredibly old. The fire station in South Chelmsford is extremely important because in looking at the last, how long does it take to get a fire? South Chelmsford, the town goes way beyond the fire station. So if there's nothing there, it's going to add another 5 to 10 minutes to the response time, which is a lot of time when something's burning.
So
I would pass
you're a
this.
yes, okay? And I would say one additional thing on this particular question. Anybody who is familiar with the fire station configuration in town knows that these 2 facilities especially are way past their useful lifespan. And the requirements of the fire service have changed drastically since these facilities were built. We didn't have female firefighters, for example. We didn't have the 24-hour sleepover shift, for example. So now these facilities have to do things that were never, ever imagined 45 and 50 years ago when they were built. So if this does not pass, it doesn't mean that we can walk away from the problem. If this doesn't pass, something will have to be done. It'll come back in some other form. So I just wanted to make that.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, so here we are. We're out of time. You've got 30 seconds to predict who's going to win the presidential election.
From the looks of the trends that we see in the betting polls, which are actually more accurate than polls, it looks like President Trump is going to serve another term.
Okay, and I'm going to disagree with you. I think Harris will be elected. So we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that later.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for your insightful comments, and go vote, either early